I can understand and accept everything. But I will never understand how my wife, who used to be kind and sweet, turned into a real monster who wanted everything to be bad for me, who set her lover on me. I was shocked.
It had been a tough Friday at work. One of the machines on the factory floor malfunctioned, and I spent most of the day alongside the engineering team, troubleshooting a series of hardware and software issues. By the end of it, we were all worn out. For the past 12 years, I've been running a printing business that I founded in northern Sydney, Australia. On this particular Friday evening, as I pulled into the garage, I parked and leaned back in my seat for a moment, exhausted and just wanting the day to be over. Being the owner of a commercial and custom printing company is always demanding. At home, I'd been feeling frustrated as well. My wife of over 15 years, Louise, hadn't been as affectionate lately. I'm the type of guy who thrives on physical closeness, whether it's small kisses, gentle touches, or some good lovemaking. It recharges me. But recently, Louise has seemed distant and moody. She's someone who values quality time and loves it when I focus all my attention on her. I try to, but it's difficult when she pushes me away and I've got a business to run. A bit about me. My name's Cameron Other. I'm 42, and Louise and I have 2 daughters. Our oldest, Carrie, is 18 and practically a carbon copy of her mother when she was younger. She's smart, driven, and knows exactly what she wants. She's currently in her 3rd year of university, studying engineering, and she plans to work with me designing new printing machines after graduation. If you're wondering how she's only 18 but already in her 3rd year, well, she's just that smart. And if you're also wondering how Louise and I have only been married 15 years when Carrie's 18, that's because of our 2nd daughter, Sarah. We were perfectly happy unmarried with Carrie, but we tied the knot when we found out Louise was pregnant with Sarah. Sarah is our free-spirited child. She's laid back, doesn't have strong opinions about much, and usually goes with the flow. She's just as bright as her sister, but she doesn't apply herself in the same way. At 15, she's a social butterfly who spends most of her time with friends or glued to her phone on Discord. Both of our girls were out for the weekend. Sarah was staying with friends, and Carrie was out with her boyfriend, Robbie. I expected them back on Sunday afternoon, which left Louise and me alone for the weekend. As I sat there reflecting on the week, I started to unwind from work. With the girls out, I hoped that maybe Louise and I could address some of our recent issues over a couple of drinks and some honest conversation. I stepped out of my 2-year-old Ford Ranger, grabbed my bag, and headed into the kitchen. Louise wasn't around, so I poured myself a Kraken and Coke, my go-to drink, threw on some mellow tunes, and sat down. Staring blankly at the walls, I tried to unwind from the day. The broken machine was somewhat operational again, but it would still cost us at least 10 grand in lost revenue, possibly more if we didn't fix it properly by next week. That was a significant portion of my Sydney staff's wages. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of movement and the click of heels. My wife, Louise, walked into the room, and she took my breath away. She's about 3 months older than me and, in my eyes, has always been incredibly attractive. Even in her 40s, after giving birth to 2 children and gaining a bit of weight, she worked out regularly and ate well, keeping her curves in all the right places. With her natural, dirty blonde hair and large brown eyes, despite the challenges we'd been facing recently, she was still everything to me. She was dressed to go out, wearing a little black dress that hugged her curves, accentuating her 32C bust, and showing just enough thigh to be enticing but still classy. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and her makeup was perfect. She set her nearly bursting handbag down on the table, looking at me. "You look amazing, love," I said, and she gave me a smile. I sighed, taking a sip of my drink. "Lou, I'm really sorry. It's been such a long day, and I just don't have the energy to go out for dinner tonight," I said, apologizing as I glanced at her outfit. She smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in her eyes. Something shifted inside me as the day went from bad to worse. "That's okay, Cam. she replied, her voice a little unsteady. I wasn't expecting you to come with me. I looked at her. In all our years together, we had rarely gone out separately, and even when she did have the occasional night out with her friends, she never dressed up as if she were going on a date. You weren't? I asked, my voice questioning. I took a big sip of my drink. Then why are you dressed like we're going out on a special date? For a moment, Louise seemed uncertain. Cameron ... She glanced down at her outfit and paused. You're leaving me? I asked, catching her off guard. No, of course not, Cam. She reached out to me, but I pulled back, laughing bitterly. Now you're going to tell me this has nothing to do with us, that it's something you need to do for yourself. You'll say you deserve it after raising 2 kids and dedicating yourself to our family. I raised an eyebrow at my wife, who was quickly losing her confidence. I glanced at the large bag she had placed on the table. Judging by the size of that bag, you weren't planning on coming home tonight. So it's nice to see that after all these years, you're just walking out on our marriage without a second thought about the damage you're about to cause. My words came out sharp and accusatory. Cam, she started, then stopped, looking at me. This time I didn't cut her off. She sighed and spoke softly. We both work so much, and I know you're doing this for us. But seeing Roger, it's just temporary. Roger? You mean Roger Fellworth, the head legal counsel at your work? Roger Fellworth, who's married with 3 kids under 10? That Roger Fellworth? I asked. For a moment, my wife didn't respond, but the panic in her eyes revealed that she knew I had figured out exactly who her lover was. It had caught her off guard. She sighed again. Yes, Cam. It's Roger. He's been so good to me these last few months. Since you haven't been around, he's... Bullshit, I snapped. What? Louise asked, startled by my sudden outburst. You heard me, Louise. I said bullshit. You're justifying your way into an affair. Sure, we both work a lot, but saying I haven't been around is complete crap, and you know it. You've been the one pulling away. I've been trying to spend time with you for months, but you keep shutting me out. Now at least I know why. You've been out screwing someone else. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor. Cameron, I am not screwing around on you, she stammered. Tonight, this weekend was supposed to be the first time. She said it hesitantly. Right, so you're planning to make it a full-blown affair, not just one night, but an entire weekend of betrayal. I glared at her for a moment before turning and storming into the kitchen for another drink. I was beyond exhausted from work, but I needed more Kraken. I poured a double as Louise moved to stand in the doorway, visibly angry, showing her true feelings for the first time. Cameron, I'm not a girl of easy virtue, and I've never been one. Unlike you and your first love, Rose, I've never been with another man in my entire life. Roger says I'm not cheating because I'm telling you about it. It's only cheating if I hide it. That's low, Lou. Bringing Rose into this, that's a real low blow, and you know it. I practically growled at her. At least she had the decency to look away. And you're dead wrong, dear wife. It's cheating if I don't accept it, and I do not accept you sleeping with another man. I suppose your new man is having the same conversation with his wife. She faltered again. I don't know. Now, her gaze fell to the floor. I grinned, adding a little Coke to my double Kraken, then turned to look at Louise. Conflicting emotions were reflected on her face. Most likely, he's just making excuses that he's unavailable. I shifted gears. Has he kissed you yet? I asked. What? Asked Louise, surprised. It's a simple question. Has Roger Fellworth kissed you yet? I said it clearly. She blushed. Yes. Did he touch T? She jerked her head up, glaring at me. Cam, this is not yours. Then she lowered her eyes again. Yes. I nodded. Have you done something more intimate to him yet? She didn't say anything when I turned away, but I saw her nod. Well, that says it all, doesn't it? I tried to control my anger. My wife pushed me away, rejected my attempts to be closer while she was getting closer to another man. So I think that's it. We're done. I went out onto the back porch, slamming the door with such force that the whole house shook. I sat down at the table on our back porch, fuming. After a hard day at work, all I wanted to do was go home and be with my wife, and now she's telling me she betrayed me. It must have been 5 minutes before Louise appeared in the doorway. She came closer, her voice softened. Cam, I really love you, but I need to do this. I've just felt so trapped for the past year. Roger was so understanding. It won't be long. You'll see. I kept staring out at the yard, avoiding her gaze. No, Louise, you don't understand. You should be facing me. I was supposed to be your best friend, your partner, but you've given yourself to another man and taken away my chance to support you. Now I don't know if I'll ever be able to be there for you again. She stayed still. Cameron, she said softly, her tone firm but with a hint of unease. You can't just walk away. Roger told me that if you do, I'll take everything from you. I can claim half your business, the house, the kids, and then it'll be easy to turn them against you. Her voice gained strength as she stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. I turned, disgusted, pulling away from her touch. You'd really do that to someone you say you love? You cheat on me, threaten me, and think you can just get away with it? I growled. I wouldn't want to, my wife replied. But Roger says in court, I'll always come out on top. You don't have much choice. I'm sure I'll get this out of my system and come back to you. You'll be fine. You're stronger than me. For the second time that night, I shot to my feet, but this time I spun around, glaring with hatred at the woman I somehow still loved in that moment. But the hate and anger I felt had taken control. You selfish, unfaithful bitch, I spat. She stepped back. You have the nerve to claim you love me, thinking that I'd even consider staying married to you after this. You say I have no choice? Well, screw you, Louise. You've shown me that I don't even know who you are anymore. You're not the woman I married. It's like something else has taken over you. The woman I loved would never threaten to destroy me by using our kids against me. So, who are you really? Cam, she stammered. I let the anger subside as quickly as it had flared, deciding to try reasoning with her for a moment to see if I could make her understand. Louise, if you love me like you say you do, then stop this now. I don't know if we can save our marriage after what you've just told me. You've been close to another man, even if you haven't slept with him. If you call it off now and we go to counseling, I promise I'll try to understand what you've been going through. I'll try to forgive your betrayal. My betrayal? She whispered. I nodded. Counseling, she whispered again. Yes, Louise, counseling. You might not see it right now, but our marriage is on its last legs after what you've said. So, end this now, and let's get into emergency counseling. I'll call Rose, and we can have her come over tonight to help. Louise brought up Rose earlier, and she was right. Rose was my first love. But it wasn't meant to be. Life took us in different directions, and we fell in love with other people. Still, Rose and her husband Toby became very close friends to both of us. I never imagined Louise would use my past with Rose against me in an argument until tonight. Rose, who was also a therapist, and Toby had grown to be some of my best friends. We complemented each other perfectly, and it helped that we shared similar views on everything, from religion and politics to intimacy and fidelity. Another bond we shared was that our kids grew up together. Robbie, Rose, and Toby's son, and Carrie had been inseparable since birth and had been dating since 5th grade. I was certain their relationship would continue to thrive, given the right environment. No, Cam, I don't want Rose involved in this, she said firmly. She sighed. Look, Cam, I understand how angry you are. You may think I don't, but I do. I started to respond, but she raised her hand to stop me. Let me finish. You think I don't love you, but I do. You're right. Those threats were wrong, and I shouldn't have made them. But that doesn't make what I said any less true. I looked at the woman in front of me, wondering if the alien force affecting her mind was multiplying. I'll make you a deal. I know I've hurt you, but, Cameron, I'm going away with Roger this weekend. I'll go to counseling once Roger and I are done. It might take a while, but if counseling is that important to you, we'll do it after Roger and I get tired of each other. And what about the girls? I asked. What about them? Louise replied. How are we going to tell them we're separating? I said flatly. Cameron, we're not... She paused, sighing. We're not separating. I've told you eventually Roger and I will be over and I'll come back. The girls won't be affected. I call bullshit again. I looked at her. And what about me? While you're off having your fling with Roger, what about me? Where's the love for me? What do you mean? Louise hesitated. Louise, I'm a physical person. You've pulled away from me. We haven't had intimacy in over 8 weeks, and you haven't even kissed me in over 2 weeks. I don't feel any love right now, Louise. So, what am I supposed to do? She looked at me like she had never even considered my needs, like it hadn't occurred to her that I might want attention or affection. I don't know, she muttered, looking down. Roger says I need to be his for now. I exploded, a mix of disappointment, rage, and sorrow surging up. Fuck Roger! Oh, wait, that's exactly what you're gonna do while you ignore your husband. Cameron, that's not fair! I cut her off, nearly shouting. You're going to tell me it's fair to deny me your husband, for a cheating asshole like Roger, that it's fair to withhold your body from me while you betray your marriage. Louise took another step back. I grabbed my glass, emptied it, and hurled it against the concrete wall next to the barbecue. The glass shattered, and in that moment, I felt my soul break along with it. I collapsed into the chair, my shoulders sagging, as hot tears streamed down my face. We stayed silent for a few minutes until the sound of a blaring car horn echoed from the driveway. I glanced at Louise, and for the first time saw hesitation in her expression. Turning back toward the desk, I felt hollow inside. Just go, I whispered. I wasn't sure if she heard me, but when I looked again, my wife was gone. I don't think I moved for about half an hour. The confrontation with Louise had hit me harder than I expected, but it was the vibration of my phone in my pocket that roused me. My daughter Carrie was calling. She had forgotten her weekend bag and wanted to let me know she and Robbie were heading home to pick it up. Sorry, Dad. Mum's phone went straight to voicemail twice, so I thought I'd call you, she said cheerfully, chatting about the B&B she and Robbie were going to this weekend. I tried to compose myself. It's okay, sweetie. Your mum's not here at the moment. I'll make sure your bag is at the door so you and Robbie can just grab it and keep going. She hesitated before responding. Dad? I sighed. Yes, sweetie. I tried to keep my tone steady, but she wasn't convinced. Who's Robbie? Carrie asked, her voice clearly puzzled. Sorry, I meant Robbie. My mistake, Carrie. I winced at my slip-up. Carrie was sharp, and I knew I'd been caught. What's going on? She asked, pausing when I didn't answer. Come on, Dad, you're worrying me. Nothing, Carrie. Just an off day. Had some trouble at work and a disagreement with your mother, so I'm a bit emotional, I explained. I didn't want to lie, but I wasn't ready to share the full story with my 18-year-old daughter. Dad, stop avoiding the truth. You're trying to distract me from something. What's Mum done? She asked, her tone accusatory. I tried to deflect. It's nothing, sweetie. I'm just having a rough moment. I'll have your bag ready. Don't let our problems ruin your weekend. Love you, Carrie. I ended the call quickly, feeling guilty for not being honest with my daughter. I went inside, splashed some water on my face, and then took Carrie's bag from her room and put it right outside the garage door where she expected to find it so she could take it and leave. It wasn't the first time one of my daughters had forgotten something. I grabbed a broom and started to clean up the broken glass when Carrie burst through the back door, heading straight for me. Dad, are you all right? She asked, her brows furrowed in concern. It was the kind of look Louise used to give me when she was worried, but I didn't notice it tonight when she was sharing her plans to meet another man. I shrugged, trying to dismiss her concern, and continued to wipe the glass. "Yes, honey. I put your bag where I always put it," I replied decisively. I bent down to pick up the pieces in a dustpan, and when I got up, I saw Robbie standing in the doorway with a worried expression on his face. I realized that I couldn't hide my feelings. I pulled out a chair and plopped down on it. Carrie sat down in front of me, grabbing and squeezing my hands. "Dad, you're not okay." Mom called me back shortly after our conversation. I heard that she was in the car, and it seemed to me that someone else was with her. "So, what's going on?" I looked at my daughter, and I think she saw that something had broken in my eyes. Their usual shine had disappeared. "Damn it!" my daughter almost screamed, quickly pulling Robbie to her. "What's wrong, baby?" Robbie asked, sensing her concern. He looked at me, but I didn't say anything, feeling old and depressed. "My mother is cheating on my father," she said bluntly. "No. Really?" Both Carrie and Robbie turned to me. I nodded slowly. "She gave me an ultimatum, and then left with her lover before you called me," I confessed sadly. "They stayed with me for the rest of the night. At some point, Rose and Toby showed up, and Robbie arrived with Thai takeout, a fresh bottle of Kraken, and some wine." Slowly, I explained to all four of them about Louise's betrayal and her ultimatum. Everyone was shocked. "Daddy?" Carrie asked. "Doesn't Mum remember the prenuptial agreement you both signed? When Louise and I got married, I was just starting my printing business. My parents had given me a significant amount of money to help with the initial capital. Their lawyers drafted a prenuptial agreement that outlined several conditions. One of them was that if either party cheated, they would leave with nothing but their clothes and 15% of the shared marital assets, while the house, cars, and children would stay with the innocent party. The business was excluded from any separation or divorce agreement with Louise. I shook my head. "I don't think your mother was thinking at all, sweetie. Remember, she said it wasn't cheating because she told me about it." Carrie scoffed. "Daddy, cheating is inexcusable whether she told you or not. It sounds like she's been emotionally cheating on you for months. Both Sarah and I have noticed things haven't been right between you two for weeks now. We just couldn't figure out why." I nodded, and then it hit me. "Oh my goodness, I need to talk to Sarah. I need to reassure her that everything will be okay." Carrie took my hands again. "Daddy, please don't lie. It's not going to be okay. Mum has broken something in you tonight, and I don't know if I can forgive her." "She's still your mum," I responded, my voice sounding more like a whimper. "Mother or not, there's no excuse for what she did to you," Carrie said firmly, then softened as she squeezed my hand again. "Sarah and I will be fine. I'll talk to her in the morning. She knew something was wrong, too." We ate, and despite my mood, I found myself having 3 servings of the delicious Thai food. However, after eating and talking with Carrie, Robbie, Rose, and Toby, I have to admit, I started to feel much better. "Would you all mind if I had a word with Cameron for a bit?" Rose asked later in the evening, as the conversation shifted away from Louise, and I felt myself withdrawing a little. The others took that as their cue and headed inside. Rose took the seat that Carrie had vacated, facing me. I think she noticed something on my face, glanced over her shoulder toward the back door where the others had gone, and then smiled back at me. "You have an amazing daughter, Cameron," Rose said. I nodded, looking at Rose. Rose was a beautiful redhead. As I mentioned before, she was my first love. We dated on and off for a few years in high school until we went to different universities. She fell in love with Toby, and shortly after, I met Louise. From then until tonight, I was completely in love with my wife. The fact that Rose and I lost our virginities to each other during schoolies week after we became legal adults never bothered Louise or Toby. It was in the past and never caused any issues. Rose and I remained close, despite, or perhaps because of, our history. But neither of us would ever consider betraying our spouses. The fact that our children met brought our families closer together. Carrie and Robbie knew a little bit about how Rose and I dated when we were younger. None of us kept it a secret. Rose nudged me with her foot, bringing me back to the present moment. "How are you, Cam?" "Don't lie to me. I know you better than anyone else." I shook my head. "I do not know, Rose. I knew we were having difficulties, but this—" I waved my hand vaguely. Then, more quietly, I added, "I still love her, Rose. I hate what she did to me, to us. I hate it, and I want to scream. I want to cry. I want to hurt her and her boyfriend, but deep down, I still love her." My voice cracked with pain. Rose nodded, switching completely into psychiatrist mode. "How can you handle this, Cam?" she asked. I looked at her. "Rose, stop using psychological jargon." I grinned sadly. "It doesn't work on me. I've known you too long for that." She smiled back, successfully distracting me from my dark thoughts. "But to answer your question, what can I do? Most likely we are breaking up, and most likely we are divorcing, observing all the conditions of the prenuptial agreement." I begged her to stay, Rose, even after she confessed to me what she was doing to that jerk Roger. I begged her to stay, said we could see a psychologist. But what will I get in return? I threatened that she would take everything from me and turn my children against me. Rose nodded understandingly. "Cam, you're right, and I think you already know that I can't be your advisor on this matter. I'm too close to both of you. Tomorrow, we'll look into finding someone else for you to talk to. But Toby and I will be there for you every step of the way. You know that Toby and I care about you deeply. I'm sure Robbie and Toby are probably trying to calm your daughter down from wanting to lash out at her mother. I don't think we've seen Carrie this angry since Candy Taylor invited Robbie to the junior school dance." She chuckled. I chuckled softly in response. "You're right." "Thanks, Rose. I'm sorry about this. You shouldn't have to be caught in the middle of it." She waved it off. "Don't worry, Cam. We're here for you. Believe me, if you were the one cheating on Louise, we'd be doing the same for her, talking about your downfall." I leaned back. "Rose, I would never—" Rose gave me a smile. "Relax, Cam." "I know you wouldn't. That's why I felt comfortable saying it. You and Toby are two of the most loyal men I know, and if you looked alike, I'd think you were brothers." Toby was fairly short, just over 5 feet tall, but he was muscular, with blonde hair and blue eyes. As for me, I have a mop of brown hair. Thanks to my job, I'm tall and fit, but not in Toby's league. I think that's why I fell in love with him. His personality reminded me of you," she said with a wistful smile, briefly lost in thought. We both laughed. It was an old conversation, long past the point of being awkward, showing that today Rose and I shared a deep friendship. For the next hour, we discussed my emotions, primarily a mix of sadness and betrayal, intertwined with anger and a numbness I couldn't quite describe, though Rose understood. Later, we went inside and found Robbie and Carrie cuddled up on the couch, with Toby sitting in one of the other lounge chairs, watching a movie. "Hey everyone," I greeted. Carrie immediately came over and hugged me. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked, concerned. I glanced at Rose, who smiled. "No, sweetie, I'm not, but I'm so grateful that you're all here. It would be much harder if you weren't," I replied. She hugged me tighter. "Dad, Robbie and I are going to stay here tonight. We don't want you to be alone." "But, Carrie, what about your weekend plans?" I asked. Robbie waved off my concerns. "Cameron," he said, "I can tell you right now there's no place Carrie and I would rather be. We can go away another time. I've already gotten a credit for the B&B while you were talking with Mom, so we can reschedule. But Carrie's right. After everything that's happened, you need us here." I couldn't argue with that, and we ended the evening soon after. Rose and Toby said their goodbyes, promising to bring breakfast in the morning. I told Carrie and Robbie good night, saying I'd shower and read in bed for a bit to clear my mind. "We'll get you some coffee in the morning, Dad." I know I won't sleep well tonight, and I can only imagine how you're feeling, Carrie said. I gave her a sad smile, thanked her, gave her another hug, and kissed her forehead before retreating to my room. After finally changing out of my work clothes and showering, I walked back into the bedroom, sighing. The room was filled with reminders of Louise. To make things worse, she'd left several clothes on the bed when she packed for her weekend without me. I angrily tossed them onto the floor or into the closet, planning to pack them up with the rest of her things tomorrow. I was lying in bed, using my iPad to read one of the latest books in the Spellmonger series, a fantasy series I've loved following for years, when my phone chirped. For a moment, I thought it might be Louise, but it was Toby, letting me know that they were home and thinking of me. I replied with a thank you and a thumbs up emoji. He responded that they would see us around 9 the next morning. Just as I was about to put my phone down, a thought crossed my mind. I opened the Find My Phone app and sent a ping to Louise's phone. It pinged back from a location a couple of hours away in the Blue Mountains. I sighed and took a screenshot of the ping to have proof that she was off somewhere, which led me to think about our security system. We had one of those Swan security systems with mounted cameras around the house that recorded both audio and video, all leading to a hard drive stored in a cupboard. There were 8 cameras spaced around the property. The ones in the front yard were set to send Louise and me an email if they detected movement. Still, all the cameras recorded continuously until the hard drive filled up, after which the cameras would start overwriting the oldest content. The drive could hold up to a week's worth of footage for all 8 cameras, so I logged in to check the back patio camera from earlier that night. Sure enough, the camera had captured footage of Louise and me discussing her infidelity when I had walked outside. I also checked the front feed and saw a large man get out of a new-looking BMW, greet Louise with a kiss, and then drive off with her. I now had undeniable evidence, a confession on video and footage of her leaving to sleep with Roger Fellworth, along with the ping from her phone proving she wasn't where she was supposed to be. I opened my laptop, logged into the Swan security system, and exported the videos into an email, along with instructions to initiate divorce proceedings. As I was struggling to find the right words for my lawyer and had just attached the videos, my phone rang. It was Louise. She must have been awake with her lover, hearing the Find My Phone alert. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, I received a notification of a voicemail. I played it. Cameron, Roger and I heard my phone ping. We're warning you now. Don't do anything foolish. Sooner or later, we'll wrap this up, and we can talk. But you need to follow my lead. If you don't, Roger will ruin you, and I will take everything from you, Louise said. I could hear Roger laughing in the background. Yes, little cuckold. Believe me, this won't last forever. But if you say a word to anyone, I will personally make sure you lose everything. Your wife, your kids, your business, and any respect you ever thought you had. When we're done, Louise will come back to you. Just play along, and everything will be fine. Now, Louise and I need to get back to what we were doing. I think she was about to give me something you've never had before you so rudely interrupted. As the voicemail ended, I heard both of them laughing. I sat there, stunned. Over the years, I had heard a lot of vulgarity, but the blatant disrespect and arrogance of this guy pushed me over the edge. I decided it was time for their downfall, not mine. I revised the email, specifying that I wanted divorce papers served to Louise at her workplace as soon as possible, and that I wanted to file a lawsuit against Roger Fellworth. A quick Google search revealed that there's no law in Australia for alienation of affection, but I wanted my lawyer to take action anyway. I wanted them to suffer. I also wanted to sue Louise and Roger's workplace for loss of income in my business, either for encouraging the affair or failing to address misconduct that caused me mental distress, impacting my business. I knew these lawsuits might not go anywhere, but just initiating them, along with enforcing the prenuptial agreement in the divorce, would put a dent in their arrogance. As I hit send, I realized I didn't have the details of Roger's wife yet, but if I could find them, I would reach out to her and let her know what a cheating bastard her husband was. I wish I could say that after sending the email, I slept soundly, reassured that I had taken action against the cheaters, but that wouldn't be true. I tossed and turned until dawn, even hearing Carrie and Robbie getting up before I could close my eyes. I listened as Robbie seemed to head out to his car to grab the coffee he had promised. I quickly threw on some pants and a shirt and made my way to the kitchen. As I entered the room, Carrie saw me, gave me a big hug, and asked if I had slept. I shook my head. "Neither did I," she replied. "I tried, but it was impossible. I just can't understand how Mom could do this to you," she complained. "I mean, to all of us, it's not just you." We chatted about her university degree for a while, trying to avoid the topic until Robbie returned with 3 much-needed large coffees. I savored the wonderful drink. I've always loved a cappuccino, the chocolate on top enhancing the coffee's flavor as it danced across my taste buds. Simultaneously, Carrie and I both sighed. Robbie chuckled. "You two are exactly alike." He then grew serious. "So, no sleep for either of you, huh?" "No, in fact, I was pretty busy emailing my company lawyer when I received a voicemail from Louise after I did a find my phone ping. I spent the next 10 minutes explaining how I put together a package to start the divorce and sue Roger and their workplace after hearing the voicemail Louise and Roger had left me. I could see Carrie struggling to hold back tears as she listened. "That woman is not my mother," she whispered, wiping her eyes with a coffee napkin. "My mother would never be so heartless as to insult my father or allow another man to belittle her husband like that." Robbie and I fully agreed. It was around 10 in the morning when we started wondering where Rose and Toby were. They had mentioned bringing breakfast around 9, so an hour later, we were getting worried. Robbie first tried calling his mother and then his father. When he couldn't reach them, I tried as well. I called Mama's house, the breakfast cafe we always visited. The owner, Josie, an elderly lady in her 60s whom we all knew, confirmed that Rose and Toby had picked up breakfast around 8:30 on their way to my place. When I hung up, my concern deepened. I was grabbing my keys so we could go search for them when Robbie's phone rang. He answered it, and within a minute he was on the floor, his face pale. I took the phone from him. "Hello, this is Cameron Other. I'm Robbie's girlfriend's father. Who am I speaking to?" I asked. "Mr. Other, this is Police Constable Colleen Sharp. I regret to inform you that Robert's parents have been in a major accident." I took a sharp breath as I looked at Robbie, nearly unconscious on the ground. Carrie had her arm around him, looking up at me with desperation in her eyes. I asked the question. "Are Rose and Toby okay, Constable?" There was a brief pause. "Mr. Other, I assume Robert can't speak at the moment." I confirmed that was the case. "Mr. Other, can you get Robert to verbally consent for me to discuss this matter with you?" I managed to get Robbie to say yes. The officer paused, taking a breath. Around 8:45 this morning, the Gettings car was hit by an out-of-control B-double semi-trailer with failed brakes. In the ensuing accident, their car was nearly obliterated. I'm sorry to inform you that Mrs. Gettings is currently in surgery. Sadly, Mr. Gettings didn't survive. I felt the blood drain from my face, sinking to the ground. Toby was dead, and Rose was in surgery. I cleared my throat. "Which hospital?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Carrie looked panicked, mentioning a hospital. I could see she was on the verge of tears, realizing how serious the situation was. I swallowed hard, knowing this wasn't the time to lose control. "They're both at Royal North Shore Hospital. Can I assume that you and Robert will be heading there soon?" she asked. I could hear a note of sadness in her voice. She was trying to remain professional, but I could tell this stranger was struggling. "Yes," I croaked out, getting the details of where to go and what to say when we arrived. Within 5 minutes, the 3 of us were out the door. I stuck to the speed limit, even though I wanted to floor it. We arrived at the hospital's trauma surgery within half an hour. The nurses did their best to calm us down. Questions like, How is Rose doing? Zrenia. Where is Toby's body? Zrenia. Will Rose make it? Logically, and what about the other driver? Were asked repeatedly. PC Sharp came in and introduced herself. We spoke for the next 20 minutes. Once again, Robbie gave me permission to act as his representative, and she explained what had happened. As Rose and Toby were driving, the out-of-control, fully loaded truck collided with their car, leaving it in ruins. On the driver's side, Toby bore the brunt of the impact, with his side of the car almost fusing with the passenger's side. He died on the way to the hospital from multiple injuries, including a skull fracture and numerous puncture wounds throughout his torso and upper body. There were other injuries, but I won't detail them here, they're too graphic. Accidents like this are horrific. Rose was in critical condition as well. She had a minor skull fracture, multiple lacerations, and 2 broken legs. However, the most severe injury was the loss of her left hand and part of her left forearm, which were crushed when the semi hit the car. The surgical team worked tirelessly to close the wound and address several other punctures. Additionally, Rose suffered from extreme blood loss due to the inability to stop the bleeding, but fortunately, if there can be fortune in such an accident, her damaged arm was raised above her head when the emergency crew extricated her, preventing her from bleeding out. The rest of the day passed in a blur of conversations and phone calls. I have to give credit to Robbie. After the initial shock, he sat with me throughout the afternoon as we waited for news about Rose and began notifying people. We contacted his grandparents first, then Toby's brother in Brisbane. We reached out to Rose's brother next. When the people from the morgue arrived, both Carrie and I had to help Robbie with the paperwork for his father's passing. Carrie called Sarah, and within an hour she was at the hospital, hugging Robbie and crying with Carrie. After a while she looked at us. "Where's Mum?" she asked innocently. Carrie and I exchanged glances. "She won't be coming," Carrie replied bitterly. Sarah looked at Carrie and then at me. "I take it that's Roger's doing?" my youngest daughter asked darkly. To say that Carrie and I were shaken on a day when everything that could go wrong would be an understatement. "Sarah, are you saying you know something about your mum and Roger?" I asked quietly. Sarah nodded solemnly, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I saw Mum bring in some new lingerie a couple of weeks ago. I asked if she had bought it for you, Dad." She looked down as her shoulders slumped. "It took a few days of pestering, but when she wouldn't admit the underwear was for you, she got upset with me and blurted out that it was for a date with some guy named Roger, saying there was no chance in hell you would ever get to see it." "Sarah, why didn't you say anything?" Carrie's tone was sharp with accusation. If my youngest daughter could have sunk any lower, she would have melted into the ground. "I don't know, I just didn't know what to do." She looked at Carrie. "We've been talking about how distant Mum and Dad have been lately. Once I found out something I didn't want to know, I stayed away from home as much as possible. I didn't want to face Mum," she looked at me. "Or you. I'm sorry, Dad." I pulled her into a hug. "It's okay, baby girl. I wish you would have said something. I only found out last night, but it's all right." She began to cry. "I'm so sorry, Dad. If I had said something, then maybe Auntie Rose and Uncle Toby." She trailed off, breaking down completely. We left later that evening to take showers and change clothes. I brought Carrie and Sarah back to my place. We got ourselves sorted out, and then Carrie drove her car back to the hospital with Sarah while I followed them. It was around 4 a.m. on Sunday when Rose was brought out of surgery. She was battered and bruised, in critical condition, but still alive. She would remain in the intensive care unit for at least a few days, as the doctors wanted to ensure there was no brain damage before proceeding with further steps. Even in his grief, Robbie was gracious with the doctors and requested to meet the surgical team that had worked tirelessly to save his mother's life. I had never been prouder of my daughter's boyfriend and hoped that one day I could call him my son-in-law. We spent the rest of the day at the hospital. I had grabbed my laptop and phone chargers from home and received confirmation that the papers were ready to be served to Louise, Roger, and their workplace on Monday morning. I was relieved to have a top-notch lawyer, much better than Roger, on my side. I also contacted my duty managers at work to ensure they could cover for me for a week, due to the family tragedy. I didn't mention that I had multiple emergencies, but they were competent and would keep things running smoothly. One piece of good news was that a member of my support team managed to fix the remaining issues with the machine that had broken on Friday. That afternoon, we began planning Toby's funeral with Robbie. Robbie left a message with their family lawyer for instructions. While the funeral wouldn't be needed if Rose recovered, Robbie wanted to be prepared. We discussed the funeral for a few hours and were later joined by Edwina, Rose's mother. Edwina, a sharp and lively woman in her early 70s, hugged her grandson and then gave me a big hug. She had always treated me like a son, loved Toby, and often joked about me being the one that got away from her daughter. She mentioned that Camilla, Toby's mother, would visit later in the week once she arranged for transportation from her retirement village, since she couldn't drive. We chatted comfortably throughout the afternoon, with Edwina joining us in the hospital waiting room as we planned. I wondered if the staff would ask us to move, but when I asked a nurse about it, she shook her head. No, unfortunately, this happens more often than you'd think. But as long as it's not too busy, you're welcome to stay. We understand the grief you're all experiencing right now and know you need to be close to Mrs. Getting while you wait for her to wake up. I smiled at her response and thanked her. Time passed quickly as we talked and reminisced. Louise was only mentioned briefly, and whenever Carrie updated Edwina on Louise, Edwina's face darkened with a scowl when no one was watching. Around 8 o'clock on Sunday evening, I answered a call on my mobile without looking, as our phones had been ringing off the hook all day with news of Toby's passing and Rose's injuries. "Hello, Cameron Other speaking," I said, watching Robbie with his arm around Carrie, hugging her and smiling as they gazed into each other's eyes. They exchanged "I love yous" and shared a gentle kiss. In their mourning, their love seemed to grow stronger. "That's not how you greet your wife," Louise scolded me over the phone. "I told you not to stir up trouble or you'd regret it. Roger is fierce and will come after you if you've said anything to anyone. Where the hell are you, Cameron? You were supposed to be home by now." I wasn't sure what had happened with Louise over the weekend, but any uncertainty or regret I had seen on Friday night seemed to have been replaced by the wrathful woman now on the phone. "Louise," I said, disdain evident in my voice. Conversation around me ceased, and everyone looked at me in unison. "That's right, you big oaf. Where are you and where are the girls? If you told them anything I warned you I'd turn them against you. You better get home now, or I'll make you regret it." I ended the call abruptly. I had no patience for threats. Tomorrow, Louise would discover that her carefully crafted story was about to fall apart. "The bitch just got home," I said with a shrug. Sarah spoke softly. We could hear her dad. "I don't know why you even answered the call." I had spent a few hours earlier talking one-on-one with my youngest daughter. She kept apologizing for not saying anything sooner, but once she grasped the extent of her mother's deceit, she was nearly as furious as Carrie. "Dad, during the divorce, I'll be living with you, okay?" Sarah had said earlier. "Of course, sweetheart," I reassured her, hugging her close. Returning to the present, I looked at Sarah and smiled. I acted on instinct. I answered the call without thinking. It just took me a moment to get my bearings. At that moment, my phone rang again. Louise, of course. Over the next 10 minutes, she called a dozen times and even tried reaching the girls. Half an hour later, Carrie had had enough. "What?" she yelled into the phone as she answered it. Louise was scolding our eldest for her tone. "Mom, stop. I have no interest in talking to such a deceitful, cheating biatch right now. I'm here with my family, my sister and dad. We're grieving, and we don't need you disrupting our sorrow." I could hear Louise screeching on the phone. unleashing a torrent of curses and swear words I never imagined she could string together, let alone direct at her own daughter. Essentially, she was convinced that Carrie was calling to discuss the breakdown of the relationship between Louise and me, rather than the death of Toby and Rose's critical condition. I realized that Louise had no idea about what had really happened. Louise continued for a moment longer until Carrie cut her off. "Mum, I have no intention of enduring your shouting any longer. And just so you know, yes, Daddy has told us everything too, so you should be aware that I have absolutely no desire to live under the same roof as you. You're a disgrace, Mum. You had a man who loved you and children who looked up to you. Now you've traded Dad for a fling who'll probably abandon you, and you've lost the respect of both your daughters." She paused as her mother presumably responded. "Yes, Sarah and I are both aware." Sarah filled us in on what she knew. "My dad is amazing because he forgave you, but right now, Sarah and I hate you as much as he does. So, pack your bags, Mum, because none of us wants you there when we come home." Carrie paused again, listening. "No, Mum, I'm not telling you where we are or when we're coming back. Why don't you call Roger and go to his place?" She feigned a pause. "What's that?" "You can't because he's gone back to his wife, who doesn't know he's a low-life cheating bastard who helped you ruin any respect your family had for you." "Too bad, Mum." Louise started to reply. "Sorry, Mum. I think they're calling our flight. I'll talk to you later," Carrie said before hanging up. She glanced at us all staring at her, then pointed to her phone. "Wrong number," Carrie said simply. Despite the gravity of the situation, everyone laughed, even the nurses at the station across from us. Edwina had gone home for the night, promising to return early in the morning. Meanwhile, Sarah and I were preparing to leave for a few hours. Carrie and Robbie would stay longer, and Sarah and I would return around midnight to switch places and let them get some rest. As Sarah and I packed our gear, a trauma nurse approached us. "She's awake," she said excitedly. We all smiled, and a nervous laugh escaped everyone. We then inquired about Rose's condition. "The doctor is examining her right now. She's still disoriented, but since she's awake, you'll all be able to see her briefly." Over the next hour, we visited Rose, or rather, what we could see of her. Almost every part of her was covered in medical equipment, with wires attached to nearly every part of her body. Her head was wrapped in bandages, and the most disturbing sight was the bandaged stump where her left forearm used to be. "Hey there, Petal," I said, using the nickname I had for Rose. When we first met, I called her my Rose Petal. Anyone else who tried to use that nickname would get an earful from her. "You gave us quite a scare, but it's good to see you're on the mend." She couldn't speak because of the breathing tube down her throat and was heavily sedated with what were likely strong medications. However, her eyes conveyed the question I wasn't ready to answer. I shook my head, and she understood. A single tear escaped from her left eye and was quickly absorbed by the bandages. Unable to touch her, I spent the rest of my visit sitting beside her, softly talking about how proud I was of her, how she was my family, and how we would all recover together. When I left the room, I was exhausted, and a nurse handed me a tissue as I walked out. I had been crying without even realizing it. I thanked her and then returned to the lounge. Half an hour later, Sarah and I hugged Carrie and Robbie before heading home. Sarah and I were utterly exhausted. We managed to get about 3 hours of sleep before heading back to the hospital to give Carrie and Robbie a break. With Rose now awake, we all felt a bit of relief. We chatted about how nice it was that Rose was up as we drove, but our mood soured when we saw a strange BMW X5 in our driveway. "Shit!" we both cursed simultaneously. I noticed the headlights were on, so I drove past, made a U-turn, and parked by the curb outside our house. We saw the curtains move, but no one came to the door. "Should we go in or just drive away?" Sarah asked. I shrugged and sighed. "We have to go in. Sorry, sweetie, but I don't think it's safe for me to drive much longer tonight without a break or some caffeine. So, let's go in. You should head to your room, close the door, and try to ignore what I'm sure will be an unpleasant conversation. "Are you sure, Dad? I can stay with you?" I smiled. Sarah hated confrontation, which was why she hadn't said anything to me before. Her willingness to face her mother with me showed how distressed she was. I took out my phone and started recording. Sarah did the same with her phone. We both got out of the car and walked up to the front door. It was unlocked, so we went straight in. Almost immediately, Roger Fellworth confronted us. "Ah, here he is, the little cuckold himself. Back to beg for forgiveness and play nice before I ruin your fucking life," he said with cold arrogance. Sarah walked into the room, catching Roger off guard. Louise hesitated for a moment, and Roger, despite his bravado, seemed a bit disoriented as he faced us. "If you don't mind, Dad, I'm too tired for this. I'm going to bed, and we'll make sure you're up by 11:30 so we can head back." Sarah walked past Roger and Louise, muttering "jerk" and "girl of easy virtue" under her breath. Once her door was closed, they turned their attention to me. "Louise told you not to say anything to your daughter, you idiot," Roger fumed. I held up my phone. "I'm recording this conversation. It's been recording since we walked in and will continue until you leave," I said, addressing the cheaters. Louise paled at the sight of my phone, and Roger's face lost a bit of color too. He glanced at the phone and then shrugged. "Doesn't matter, cuckboy," he smirked. Roger was an imposing figure. He stood taller than me, with broader shoulders, though most of his size came from fat rather than muscle. He was balding, and his chin sagged with jowls. I guessed he was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. Honestly, I couldn't understand why Louise would get involved with someone like him. I ignored Roger for a moment and looked directly at my wife. "Louise, I asked you not to be here when I got home tonight, and now you insult me further by bringing your lover into our home. Is there no limit to your depravity?" "Cameron," she began, but Roger interrupted, stepping forward and getting in my face. "Listen here, you pathetic cuck. We told you how things were going to be and warned you not to say a word. Now, I'm going to make your life a living hell." His voice was loud, with no care that a 15-year-old girl could overhear him. "Mr. Fellworth, is it?" I said calmly, looking him in the eye. "You're not welcome here. I also suggest you watch your language. My young daughter is in the other room." "So what?" he yelled. "She won't say anything, and neither will you." He snatched the phone out of my hands, threw it to the ground, and trampled on it before we could react. Then, grinning maliciously, he turned to me and started shouting, "You're just a worthless village printer whose wife was so bored with him that she begged me to spend time with her. We've been having fun with her all weekend. I know you've never had her like this." He smiled menacingly when I looked at my broken phone on the floor. Then Louise decided to step in, and I had no idea what had happened between them, but her next words made it clear that she was no longer the woman I married. "Cameron, it's true. Roger is 10 times a better lover than you are, but now that you've told the girls, you're going to have a really hard time. It would be better if you didn't say anything, because now Roger and I will have to punish you." "Louise, what are you—" I didn't have a chance to finish because Roger swung at me. His blow hit the target and I fell, trying to dodge the blow, but it still hurt me. "What the hell, dude? You hit me in my own house," I shouted, rubbing the place where he hit me. "So what? Louise will support whatever I do to you. I could have done something terrible to you right here, and she would have told the cops that you attacked me and I had to defend myself. Don't you understand, Cook? I'm a lawyer. I make sure that everything happens the way I want it to. You may think you're a big shot in the printing world, but people like me control the money that makes the world go round." He laughed. "I take what I want, from whom I want, when I want, and no one can stop me." I looked up from the floor and looked at Louise. "Louise, is this true? Are you really going to support this jerk?" I asked, getting up. Roger braced himself for another fight, but when I focused on her, he calmed down a little. She straightened up a little, but kept a defiant expression on her face. I'm sorry, Cameron, but yes, I will support Roger in everything. Even if he does something terrible, you're just not a real man like him. I stared at her, wondering what had happened to brainwash her so badly with this pathetic excuse for a man. I shrugged and sighed. Well, dear wife, there's nothing left to say. Both of you need to leave now, or I'll return the favor you just gave me and make your lives a living hell. Neither of you will be able to face anyone without being laughed at. Roger, emboldened by his earlier cheap shot, mistakenly thought he could take me. Sure, Roger was a big guy, but it was all fat, not muscle. I wasn't as big, but working on printing machines had given me a solid build. I'd also been in a few fights and done some amateur boxing, so I knew how to handle myself. As Roger charged at me, I quickly stepped aside, telling him how stupid it was to attack me in my own house. I tripped him, and he crashed through a coffee table but got up quickly. Sarah, hearing the noise, rushed out of her room and started screaming for me to leave her dad alone. Louise tried to quiet her down by holding her, but Sarah was struggling, screaming, and trying to break free to get to me. Roger tried to distract himself and attack me again, still convinced that only his height could overcome me. I stepped towards him and struck a quick blow, causing him to freeze in place. He froze for a moment, stunned, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of water, before he collapsed to the floor. He looked at me, clearly confused by what had just happened. "Sarah, look away, honey," I said. As soon as she turned her head, I delivered a powerful kick to Roger's groin, putting all my strength into it. He doubled over, gasping for air. When he groaned, Sarah looked back. "Honey, can you call 000? Tell them your father was attacked and I protected us. Tell them that we have a recording of everything that is happening and that we need the police and an ambulance as soon as possible," I said. Sarah, freed from Louise's arms, ran into her room and slammed the door. "Good girl." I grabbed Roger by the ear, leaned closer and spoke softly, looking at Louise with eyes full of rage. "Listen, you idiot. You stole my wife and came here thinking I'd be easy prey. Now you're lying on the ground in pain and you're about to be arrested. You have no idea what you've done or how much I'm going to ruin your miserable life. Do you think you're cool? I just made you a eunuch." I let go of his ear and let him fall back to the floor. "What have you done?" Louise screamed when Roger fell and rushed to him. "Cameron, what the hell did you do to Roger?" I shrugged, looking at the woman I would have given my life for just a few months ago, but today I wouldn't care if she was on fire. "It doesn't matter, Louise. Today none of you bothered to check on me or my daughters before attacking me. You didn't ask how Sarah was or where we were. You were just following that idiot and his plans." She stared at me, kneeling over her fallen lover, her eyes wide with disbelief. After a brief silence, I broke it. "Not going to ask? Fine, I'll tell you. While you were off with that fat jerk for the weekend, our daughter and her boyfriend came to see me. She's not stupid. She knew something was wrong, even though I tried to hide it. Then, before long, Rose and Toby showed up too. "Oh, Cameron, you didn't," she whined. "No, I didn't. Carrie and Robbie did. They're smart and they picked up on the situation," I replied. "They were there for me when you weren't. They left later that night, promising to bring breakfast on Saturday so we could figure out how to handle you and your lover over there." I gestured toward Roger, groaning on the floor. "Anyway." I dragged out the word, my voice softening as I got to the hard part. "Rose and Toby were on their way here with breakfast from Mumma's when a semi ran out of control and T-boned them. Toby is dead, and Rose is fighting for her life in the hospital. It's been all over the news. If you and your lover here had bothered to check or even ask, you might have found out that because of you, one of our friends is dead, and another might not survive." I let it sink in, but after a moment, Louise had the audacity to snap at me. "It's not my fault, Cameron. We told you to keep quiet. If you had, they'd still be alive. Their deaths are your fault, not mine. No, it's yours, our daughter said from the doorway. She looked at me. Police and ambulance are on the way. She turned back to her mother. I don't even know who you are anymore, but you're not my mother. It's your fault Uncle Toby is dead, not Dad's. If you hadn't cheated, none of this would have happened. She glanced down at her hands. And it's my fault too. Maybe if I had told Dad sooner, he could have stopped this. Sarah, I began. No, Dad. I should have said something. But the blame rests with her. She pointed at her mother, then retreated to her room, leaving Louise and me staring at each other. We could now hear the emergency sirens, and no one spoke as 2 police cars arrived, bringing chaos with them. Louise tried to explain that I had assaulted Roger, who was groaning on the ground. When asked if Roger was her husband, she hesitated, admitting that I was her husband, but claimed I had still attacked Roger. I gave my side of the story, and soon after, the ambulance arrived, taking a badly injured Roger away on a stretcher. Once the ambulance left, it seemed like the police were leaning towards arresting me, as I was the one who had assaulted someone. Louise was again insisting I was responsible for everything when Sarah came back into the room. Excuse me, officer, she said to the officer questioning us. I have a recording here that proves everything my dad said, including the part where that man threatened to kill him and that my mom would lie to protect him. She handed the officer a USB drive. What? How? Roger smashed your phone, Louise exclaimed, confused and not realizing the police were still listening. Mum, Dad suspected something might happen, so when I went to my room, I put my phone by the door to record everything. She turned to the officer. I'm sorry, but after hearing everything, I don't feel safe around my mom. Could you please not make me stay with her? She did say she'd support that man no matter what he did to Dad. I even heard him hit Dad at least once. I'm scared, Sarah said, moving closer to me and hugging me while glaring at her mother. After that, it didn't matter anymore. Sarah, being a minor, had evidence and gave a statement against Louise. My wife was arrested and taken to the station for the night. As she was led away, Louise shot me a glare but said nothing. After everything that had happened, there was no time to sleep. Exhausted, we took a shower, changed, and I had some coffee before heading back to the hospital. When we entered Rose's room, Carrie and Robbie were sitting together, leaning on each other. As soon as Carrie saw my face, she gasped. Dad, what happened? She asked, noticing the bruise starting to form where I had been hit. We spent the next few minutes explaining her mother and Roger's visit. I told her how I kicked him where it hurts, making it clear I wasn't going to be humiliated. A quiet sound came from Rose's bed, and we realized she was awake, her eyes filled with sadness as she looked at me. Rose, I stammered. I'm sorry, sweetheart. If I had known you were awake. I trailed off, realizing I had been talking about part of what happened with Toby in front of her. Even though she already knew, I still should have been more considerate. I saw her right arm shift slightly. Most of her body was covered in bandages, and at least one of her fingers was broken, but she tried to lift her hand. I rushed to her side, carefully taking her hand without hurting her. Are you okay, Rose? Can I get you anything? Do you need a nurse? I asked, then added, blink once for yes, twice for no. She blinked twice, then slowly a third time, but curled her unbroken fingers around my hand. I stayed there, holding it, for the rest of the night. The following couple of weeks passed in a blur. Louise's parents bailed her out of jail the next day, but they didn't hold back from calling me every name under the sun until Carrie stepped in and set them straight. A few days later, when Louise returned to work, she was greeted by a process server who handed her divorce papers, then immediately served the same papers to the company owner. By the end of the day, Louise was on unpaid leave, suspended pending a review, and back living in her parents' spare room. She came by the house while Carrie and Robbie were there resting. They watched her closely as she gathered a few belongings before making the walk of shame back to her parents' car. Carrie hugged her grandparents but made it clear that her mother would never be welcome in the house again. After the incident with Roger and me, Carrie saw her mother not only as a shameless adulteress, but also as someone with blood on her hands because of the accident. It took nearly a week before the doctors felt comfortable removing Rose's breathing tube, even though she was conscious. But when they did, her first raspy words were directed at me. "Cameron, are you all right?" I was taken aback. "Rose, how can you even ask that?" She gave a sad smile. "It's okay, honey. I knew about Toby before you told me. I had hoped, but in those moments right after the accident, even though we were both stunned and awake, we confessed our love to each other. Somehow, he knew he wasn't going to make it, but that I would." Tears streamed down her face as she spoke. "When I woke up the first time, I was so out of it, but I remember looking into your eyes and knowing he was gone." I settled into the chair next to the bed, grasping her right hand. It was damaged, but still intact, unlike her missing left hand. Even though it was just the two of us in the room, she spoke to me in a whisper, as if sharing a secret. "Last night I had a dream. Toby appeared in it and he looked so beautiful. He wasn't hurt and seemed perfectly fine." She smiled softly. "He told me it was okay, that it was his time, and that the accident wasn't anyone's fault, not even Louise's." Her smile faded slightly as she continued. "He said he loved me, but now it's my responsibility to take care of you. Cameron, he really loved you like a brother and was deeply upset about what happened." I looked at her, concerned. "Rose, you're the one who needs looking after. Don't you realize you're missing a hand?" She chuckled, lifting her stump slightly. "I am quite armless now, aren't I?" I couldn't help but snort in response. "I guess it's my job now to lend you a hand when you need it," I teased. She groaned, but then laughed warmly. "I'm serious, Cam. I miss Toby terribly, but that dream gave me peace. He made me promise to look after you." I raised my hands in mock surrender, and she giggled. I smiled back. "All right, you win. You can take care of me." Rose looked pleased. "But only after you're out of here. Until then, it's my job to look after you." Unlike those initial 2 weeks, the following months dragged on. When I wasn't at work, I was at the hospital with Rose. When I wasn't at the hospital, I was packing up the house. The girls and I decided to sell our home and move. I found a place just outside Crow's Nest in northern Sydney at a reasonable price and managed to get a decent deal on our current home. The new house is smaller but conveniently located near public transport and the medical center. It has 3 bedrooms, plus a study nook, and if you stand on your tiptoes at the master bedroom window, you can catch a glimpse of Sydney Harbor in the distance. My divorce from Louise was progressing. The girls had cut off all ties with her, and the few calls they had with their mother ended badly for Louise. Sarah, our usually easygoing daughter, had become quite tough and scowled whenever her mother was mentioned. Over the past month, Carrie had essentially moved in with Robbie, which didn't bother me, although Louise had called me out on it numerous times, labeling me a gutless cuckold and pathetic lover. Louise was struggling, living in a spare bedroom at her parents' house. They reached out to me a few times in an attempt to reconcile, but after I played them the audio recording from that night with Roger and Louise that Sarah had on her phone, they apologized and stopped trying to mend things. If Louise's life was spiraling downward, Roger's had crashed spectacularly. He had to have one of his testicles removed, and although he named me in a lawsuit, the police advised him that while he could sue me, it would end poorly for him as he was at fault. I could easily defend myself and my family. After just a week, his workplace dismissed him for bringing disrepute to their firm, hoping it would pressure me to drop the lawsuit against them. However, my lawyer saw this as an opportunity and was negotiating a settlement with them. Roger's wife had somehow obtained a copy of the recording. I swear I wasn't the source, but Sarah did give me a few suspicious looks. I was baffled by how she managed to find it, but one evening I received a call from Miranda Fellworth. We spoke for over an hour, sharing our stories. Miranda had suspected Roger of cheating several times, but this was the first time she had concrete evidence. It turned out that much of the Fellworth fortune came from a trust established by Miranda's grandparents, which had funded Roger's law school education many years ago. Since Roger wasn't a beneficiary of this family trust, Miranda told me he would receive nothing from it. They also had children, one of whom aspired to become a lawyer, but Miranda worried that this ambition might change once he learned of his father's unfaithfulness. Roger was now staying in a rundown hotel on a credit card nearing its limit and was struggling to find a new job. I honestly hoped he continued to struggle. Rose was improving slightly each day, so a month after the accident, she was able to leave the hospital with a nurse for a few hours, allowing us all to say a formal goodbye to Toby. It was odd. Despite the sadness, Rose, of all people, smiled frequently, laughed at the stories people shared, and when she cried, she somehow made others feel better about themselves. Regarding her injuries, Rose's legs were still in casts, and she had several bandages, including on her head and tightly wrapped around her left forearm. She had a red scar running from just above her left eyebrow, across the bridge of her nose, and down her right cheek. The doctors mentioned that if the scar didn't heal and fade as expected, they could consider plastic surgery in the future. At the funeral, I made sure to be the one pushing Rose's wheelchair as she greeted everyone. Her nurse, who was always within a few steps, smiled at me but allowed me to assist Rose. A month later, while I was in Rose's hospital room handling accounts and paperwork, I suddenly felt her gaze on me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I set aside the invoice I was working on. "What's wrong, Petal? Do you need something?" I asked, turning to her. To my surprise, Rose was staring at me with tears streaming down her face. "Cameron, she began to say. Instantly, I was by her side, wrapping my arms around her. I held her as she cried, checking her monitors. Aside from a slightly elevated heartbeat, everything seemed normal. This was an emotional reaction, something the hospital psychiatrists had warned might happen. Since she had woken up, she had been more concerned about others than herself. "Shh, Rose. Everything will be all right. I'm here for you. You won't have to walk alone, you know that?" I said, trying to comfort her. She cried more, nodding and holding on to me with her unbandaged arm. "I know, Cameron. I just miss him so much," she said, looking at me with a pleading expression. "I understand, Rose. Trust me, I do. Toby was my best friend. I miss him deeply. If it weren't for you and Toby after what Louise did." She hugged me tighter. "Will it get better?" she asked, her voice filled with pain and weakness. "I don't know," I replied softly. "I want to believe it will. Toby is gone, but you're still here and we have our kids. That has to mean something." She was silent for a moment before she seemed to relax. "Thanks, Cam. I don't know if I could hold it together without you. You're becoming quite wise in your old age, you know," she said, letting out a soft, nervous giggle. I gently stroked her hair, running my fingers through her thick, curly red locks, and then leaned in to kiss her at the top of her hairline. "You're welcome, Rose. With Toby gone and Louise no longer in my life, I find myself needing a best friend. Are you interested in that role?" I asked. Rose, still holding me close, did something I hadn't anticipated. She leaned in and kissed me. I found myself kissing her back, feeling a stir of romantic love for Rose that I thought was long gone. Realizing what was happening, I pulled away. "Rose, I'm sorry. You are my best friend, my oldest friend, and I care about you deeply. But I don't know. This is complicated, and we're still grieving for Toby." She sighed and nestled closer to me. Without thinking, I wrapped my arm around her as we sat on her hospital bed. "I understand, Cam. I get what you're saying, but my feelings haven't changed since high school," she said. That night, I fell into a restless sleep. I must have tossed and turned for hours until eventually I found myself in what I immediately recognized as a dream. I was in a bar I'd never seen before, an enormous place where I had a sense that walking from one end to the other would take a long time. The bar was filled with tables and people. Some were drinking, others were playing darts or pool. The issue was that everyone appeared out of focus. I knew they were there. I even greeted some as I passed by and received greetings in return, though their faces remained blurred. Despite that, it was a pleasant dream. I was contemplating walking to the bar when I noticed someone who was in focus. He was sitting alone at a table. As I approached, he turned and stood up to greet me. "Toby!" I exclaimed, rushing to hug him, but skidded to a stop just before I reached him. He laughed. "It's good to see you too, Cam. It's all right, you can hug me." We embraced, and then I pulled back to look at him. He looked just as good as the evening before the accident, and he laughed again as he saw me inspecting him. "You look great, mate," I said. "I know this is a dream, but it's so good to see you." He smiled and we sat down at the table. In front of me was a Kraken and Coke, and Toby had a pint of Guinness. We sipped our drinks for a moment. "Ah," he sighed. "Good stuff." He looked at me. "So, how are you, Cam?" I felt a bit deflated, the dream starting to feel real. "Not great, mate," I told the dream version of my best friend. "The divorce from Louise is tough. The girls are always angry. I'm trying to support Rose in her recovery, but it's hard, and I feel like I'm just drowning in it all." Toby nodded. "What about you and Rose?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I took a moment to consider the dream Toby. He kept his eyebrow raised, smiling at me. "What about us?" I asked. "Come on, Cam. We've been friends for more years than I can count. You're my closest mate, and I know things about you and Rose that could make anyone blush. I know you two love each other." I snorted. "Of course, Toby. She's as close to me as you and Louise were. Without the two of you in my life, she's now my closest friend. I want to see her get better." He sighed. "I understand that, Cam. But what about the kiss this afternoon that had you so restless before you fell asleep and came here? You can't say that meant nothing." Of course, my subconscious would conjure up a version of my best friend to make me feel guilty about kissing his wife. I looked at my friend and said, "I know it was more than just nothing, Toby. I love her, always have." He gave me a smile. I felt a wave of panic. "Look, Toby, Rose was married to you, and Louise was married to me. We did date and shared a lot, but how can I possibly cheat on you with her?" "Cameron," he said earnestly, "I'm gone. It's final. You and Rose can't be unfaithful to me. She still has so many years ahead and deserves someone who will love and protect her as I did. You've said yourself that Louise is out of your life, or will be soon, and you do love Rose." He paused, and it felt like the real Toby was trying to convey something crucial, not just a figment of my imagination. "Rose loves you too, Cameron. Yes, she's grieving my death, but she's clinging to the hope that you won't leave her. She cherishes you with the same love she had for me. In fact, she might even love you more since you've known her longer. I mean it." I was at a loss for words. "You know," he leaned in as if sharing a secret, "if Rose and I hadn't met while you two were apart, she was planning to track you down and make you marry her." "What?" I almost choked on my rum. "How on earth would you know that?" "She told me," he said with a grin. I was taken aback. "How could she have told you? You're just a dream of my best friend, a figment of my imagination helping me sort things out. Rose never mentioned anything like that to me." Toby laughed. "Cam, look around at the walls in this pub. This isn't just a dream, and I'm not just a creation of your weary mind," he said. "That's nonsense," I replied. "Cam, it's the truth. I can prove it," he said. "How?" I asked, still doubtful. He held up 3 fingers. "3 ways," he said with a hint of humor. "First," he said, raising his index finger, When you get to the hospital tomorrow, ask Rose what my last words to her were. I snorted. I already know that. You were in the car, and you both told each other you loved one another. Toby smiled and shook his head. Well, that's partially true. But after we both realized I wasn't going to make it, I found peace. Somehow I knew Rose would see the next day, and my final words were, "Love Cameron for all your days." I started to respond, but Toby raised his hand, this time showing 2 fingers. Secondly, tomorrow at the hospital Louise will show up. It won't be pretty. Toby, there's no way. Third, he interrupted, holding up 3 fingers. My mum will bring you and Rose one of those amazing chicken salad sandwiches from the Asian sandwich shop on North Harbor. She'll be wearing yellow sandals and will let you know she was thinking of you both while driving. I looked at my friend as he laughed at me again. Toby, how can you know this? You're dead, and this is a dream, I said. He touched his nose like he was revealing a secret. Honestly, I'm not supposed to say. It's a miracle I even got to meet with you and Rose, but I was asked to, so here I am. I'm just happy to spend a bit more time with you. I didn't fully believe him, but I had to admit I was glad to see him. So, if everything happens as you say, what should I do? Marry her? I asked. Toby laughed again. That's up to you, my friend, but if you do marry Rose, you'll have my blessing. He grabbed his drink and pulled me over to the dartboard. That's something I couldn't have said while I was alive. But love her fiercely, Cam. Make me proud, no matter what you choose. For what felt like the next hour, Toby and I played darts, drank, and at one point I think we were singing bar songs. Some other patrons even joined us, though they're a blur now, except for one guy who seemed significant in this strange setting. As we drank and danced, the pub seemed to fade away. My last memory was Toby hugging me, thanking me for being his friend as we said our goodbyes. I woke up with hot tears streaming down my face. I was sad, but also happy. I even got to say goodbye this time. By the time I was shaved and dressed, the dream had mostly faded from my memory. I stopped by the office to check in with my managers. Everyone knew I was spending a lot of time working from Rose's hospital room and that I was in the process of moving house in the next few weeks. My assistant had prepared all my papers for the day, accepted the ones I worked on yesterday, and then guided me into a meeting room where I spent an hour with my floor managers before heading to the hospital. I arrived around lunchtime, and Rose greeted me with a smile as I entered her room. She had received a report from the doctors indicating that while she still had a long recovery ahead, she would be able to go home in a few weeks. She had been expressing her frustration with the hospital bed for several days. Although they had provided her with a bed near a window, she was eager to escape the confines of the hospital. I was thrilled for her. Getting her settled at home would make a significant difference. We discussed her anticipation of sleeping in her own bed when Toby's mother, Camilla, walked in. I didn't know Camilla as well as Rose's mother, Edwina, but we were friendly acquaintances. She smiled as she entered the room. "Rose," she said warmly, "you look so much better today, and Cameron, you look so dashing and handsome. It's wonderful to see how well you're taking care of Rose. I know Toby would be so proud of you." She leaned over to kiss Rose, and I noticed her yellow sandals. I froze, and Rose saw the color drain from my face. "Cam, what's wrong?" Both Rose and her mother-in-law looked at Camilla's feet. "Is there something wrong with my shoes, Cam?" Camilla asked, frowning. "I got them on sale yesterday." "No, sorry, Camilla," I replied. "It's nothing, just a dream I had last night. Your shoes just reminded me of it," I said, trying to brush it off. Rose continued to stare at me for a moment while Camilla fussed. "Oh, before I forget, I brought you both lunch from that fantastic Asian sandwich shop in North Harbor. They make the most amazing chicken sandwiches," she said, excitedly telling us how they cram everything into a sandwich that you can hold with both hands for just $6. As Camilla said, chicken sandwiches, I found myself mouthing the words along with her as I took a seat. "Cam, are you all right?" Rose asked, looking concerned. I glanced at Rose, then at Camilla, who was unwrapping the sandwiches, and finally at her yellow sandals. It was just a dream, I reassured myself. A silly coincidence. I tried to excuse myself by telling both women that I was simply exhausted. Camilla didn't know me well enough to protest, but Rose gave me a look that clearly meant we'd discuss it later. So, we enjoyed our sandwiches, and Camilla was right. They were excellent. Imagine layers of chicken, lettuce, tomato, cheese, beetroot, pineapple, salt, pepper, and a fantastic fruit relish nestled between two slices of very soft yet crusty bread, creating a lunch that makes your taste buds dance. After lunch, we chatted about trivial things, mostly the weather and how we would get Rose home. I started to unwind, no longer as anxious, easing into a post-lunch relaxation when Louise walked into the room. Louise was dressed in jeans and a blouse, her hair styled in a bun. To be honest, she looked good, perhaps a bit leaner than the last time I saw her, but still attractive. She was carrying a bouquet of flowers and a wrapped gift, striding in as if she belonged there, walking as if the past few months had never happened. "Oh, Rose, it's so good to see you. You're looking well, all things considered," Louise said. She glanced around the room and then noticed me. Her entire demeanor shifted instantly. "Cameron," she hissed, "what are you doing here? It's your fault that Rose is here and Toby is dead. You have no right to be here. Once I'm done divorcing you, I'll make sure Rose is taken care of so she never has to see your ugly face again." I stood up, feeling a storm brewing. "Get out!" a small voice said. Everyone turned to see Rose crying, her gaze fixed on the window. "Rose, it's okay. I'll get Cameron out of here," Louise said. "No, he stays. You go," Rose replied, tears trickling slowly down her face. I took a step toward Louise. "Louise, you need to leave," I said firmly. "For once, listen, you need to go." Louise lost her temper. She threw the gift on the floor with a distinctive crash and hurled the flowers against the wall. I positioned myself between Louise and Rose, who was lying on the bed, while Camilla stood stunned in the background. Louise erupted, "What the hell, Cameron?" "What did you say to her? She knows it's your fault Toby's dead, right? Why the hell would she think I had anything to do with her accident or with you? You're the one who needs to leave. I'll take care of Rose and stay with her now that she's lost her husband," she said, glancing at Rose's stump where her left hand used to be. "And with her lost hand, I'll make sure she's well cared for," I snapped. "What makes you think you can just waltz in here, after more than 2 months without a word, and act like you have any right to talk to Rose?" "Cam," I pointed to the bed behind me. "Rose has lost her husband, I've lost my best friend, and the kids and I have been here every day since the accident. Where the hell have you been?" I demanded. "Cameron," the voice repeated. I continued, "I know why you're here. You've lost your job, your parents are sick of you crashing in their spare bedroom, your daughters won't speak to you, so you thought you'd try to use Rose to live off of her until she's had enough of your nonsense." "Cameron!" Rose's voice came through insistently for the 3rd time. I turned to her, my anger dissipating at the sight of my best friend's concerned face. "Sorry," I muttered. "It's all right," Rose said, turning to glare at Louise. "Louise, you need to leave. Your treatment of Cameron and your outburst just now prove you're no longer my friend. Don't you dare use Toby's death to blame Cameron. You've become a repugnant, vile person, and I'm ashamed to have called you my friend or confided in you over the years." Louise began to protest, but Rose held up her stump. "Save it, Louise. You can't stay here. I am no longer your friend, and you are not welcome." "Do I need to call security to have you removed?" Rose asked, addressing my soon-to-be ex-wife. "Rose," Louise pleaded, "that's not fair. No one is listening." "No, Louise," Rose interrupted, her voice rising with anger. "What's not fair is that my husband is dead, and I'm left maimed for life because you chose to betray your husband, who was one of my closest friends. There was silence in the room, and only distant sounds from the hallway broke the silence. No one said a word, and then a familiar expression of denial appeared on Louise's face, what I expected from her. She looked from Rose to me, back to Rose, then back to me, and finally back to Rose for one last look. Each time, a variety of emotions were reflected on her face, but the frown remained unchanged. When she looked at Rose for the last time, her anger was palpable. "Well, then go to hell, Rose. You can shove all the help I was going to give you into your deep place." Her sentence was cut short when I grabbed Louise's arm and dragged her out of the room. I headed down the hall to the nearest exit, throwing open the fire doors and continuing to drag Louise with me. Fortunately, the doors were not locked. Louise continued to mutter and swear as she continued to shout towards Rose's hospital room. I knew the guards wouldn't leave me alone. I turned to my unruly wife. "Louise, I do not know what is wrong with you. I do not know what turned you from a loving wife and caring friend into this, but it will end right now," I said firmly. Fortunately, Louise stopped talking and jumped back. "Cameron," she said weakly. "No, Louise, I've had enough. You've destroyed all the relationships around you, from your daughters to your friends, including me. No one wants to see you within 100 meters of us. You've turned into a terrible person who doesn't seem to care about anyone else." The doors opened and 2 burly guards appeared. They saw Louise and me. "Are you all right, mister?" Peter, the larger of the 2 guards, asked. I waved him off. "All right, Peter. Louise was just a little emotional and upset to see Rose in a hospital bed. But she's leaving now, isn't she, Louise?" I looked at her intently. The guards were not deceived by my words and prepared to intervene. Louise looked at me and then at the guards, shrugging her shoulders. "Sure, I'll see you later, Cameron," she said. I shook my head. I hope not. The 3 of us watched as Louise walked away. Then, they led me back into Rose's room, where Camilla and Rose were whispering to each other. After confirming that Rose was okay, security left, and the cleaners came in to tidy up the mess caused by the present. About 20 minutes later, Camilla also left, giving me a big hug. "Thank you, Cameron. Now take care of her. She needs you," Camilla whispered as she hugged me before heading out to catch her ride home. "Are you all right?" I asked Rose as I sat down on her bed, now just the 2 of us. I took her right hand in mine. She scoffed. "Aren't I supposed to be asking you that?" I shrugged. It's been a weird day, but after what just happened with Louise, I felt, I don't know, more at ease. But it actually started with a dream I had last night. Rose's head snapped toward me. "Dream?" I nodded. "Yeah, I couldn't sleep when I got home last night." I blushed, realizing she might know that our kiss was partly to blame. Anyway, I was restless, but when I did manage to sleep, I dreamt about Toby in a pub. Rose nodded, as if she understood. It was odd. It felt like I knew I was dreaming. The pub was large, and there were other people there, but it was like... They were out of focus, Rose finished for me, her eyes searching mine. I must have looked surprised. Yes, they were out of focus, except for Toby and another guy. I can't remember the other guy, but Toby was very clear. We talked, and he told me things that would happen today. Camilla's shoes, the sandwiches, Louise showing up. Toby said all of these things would happen. I looked back at Rose, and her eyes told me she believed me. "There was another one, wasn't there?" she asked softly. I nodded, surprised. How did she know? I glanced at her as a tear slid down her cheek, and she squeezed my hand. I hesitated, afraid to ask, yet desperate to understand. "Love Cameron for all your days," Rose said quietly but firmly, locking eyes with me. I inhaled deeply. "Rose," I whispered. She nodded, another tear following the first down her face. Those were Toby's last words to me before we both blacked out in the car accident. They were the last words he ever said to me in this life. My tears flowed with hers. How did you know? I managed to croak. Almost in a whisper, she replied, Toby and the pub. When you told me, I just knew. He met me there, telling me how brave I was, but that I had to let go and love you, as I always have. He said you wouldn't be able to ask the question when the time came, but I had to share our final words. At that, we collapsed into each other's arms. I held Rose close as the light of the afternoon faded, and we wept. As we cried, we spoke softly about the man we both loved, the friend, the lover, the husband, and the father. We grieved together, drawing strength from our shared loss. As night fell, and the sounds of the hospital continued around us, Rose made space for me on the small hospital bed. We clung to each other, both suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. Finally, as sleep overtook us, I kissed her head and whispered, I love you, Petal. Rose sniffled softly and whispered back, I love you too, Cam. From that day on, things became progressively easier for us. The next morning, the kids, Sarah, Carrie, and Robbie, found us cuddled together under a hospital blanket that a nurse must have placed over us during the night. When we woke up, Sarah clapped, and they were all standing there, watching us sleep. I gently kissed Rose on the lips as I got up and stretched. Carrie smiled and kissed Robbie. We spent the morning explaining most of the previous day's events to Louise, omitting the part about the dream with Toby. Later that week, we all agreed that instead of moving back home after being discharged, Rose would come live with Sarah and me. Our new place was closer to the hospital, and we decided that Carrie and Robbie would stay at Rose's house. They'd rent out the other 2 rooms to university students, with Rose's and my approval, of course. By the time Rose was discharged, she was out of the formal casts and wearing hard fabric casts that could be removed when needed, allowing her to continue healing. We all saw the stump where her left forearm had been. Healthy skin was growing around it, and while it was bittersweet, Rose was mostly coming to terms with her disability. The skull fracture had healed as well, and thankfully there were no lasting effects aside from a mild concussion that had been managed in the hospital. Bringing her home was one of the happiest days we'd had in years. Honestly, I was feeling a bit eager with my new girlfriend moving in. Since that night at the hospital, Rose and I had gone from kissing to some light touching, but I was nervous about going further, afraid of hurting her. However, after seeing the progress in our relationship and learning about our history, her doctors told Rose she could resume a full relationship once she was home, as long as we were careful during the first few months. The kids had already moved many of Rose's clothes and personal items into the new house and, rather boldly, had put them in the master bedroom with mine instead of the spare room as we had originally discussed. But honestly, I didn't mind their cheeky decision. When we returned home, we spent several hours chatting with the children. After dinner, Carrie and Robbie returned to Rose's old house, and Sarah excused herself and went to a friend's for a few hours, leaving Rose and me alone for the first time that day. Cameron? Yes, my Petal, I replied. I know we don't have to rush, but I haven't had a release in months. Could you help me walk to the bedroom? She asked with a smile. Of course, my love, I said, smiling and helping her up. We went into the bedroom with the crutch under our arm, and I supported her from the other side. Once there, I carefully helped her to lie down on the bed. It was a truly wonderful and wonderful evening. I have not experienced such emotions for a long time. The next morning, we woke up to the smell of breakfast being prepared. A few moments later, Carrie entered the room, covering her face with her hand. Cover up, you two. I'm coming in, she said, removing her hand when she saw that we were already covered with a sheet and smiling. Did you sleep well? What is it? She asked. Amazing, honey, Rose replied sleepily. It's so nice to sleep in a normal bed again. She looked at me and added, and sleep next to the one you love. They were all laughing when we came down about 10 minutes later. The rest of the morning was relaxed. Our new family felt good. It seemed like it had always been that way, and I guess in a way it was. We were always in each other's lives. There was a relaxed atmosphere in the family when we were just ourselves. A few weeks later, the divorce between Louise and me was finalized, and our assets were officially divided. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement, Louise ended up with very little. She didn't touch my business, which was quite valuable, and I kept the proceeds from the sale of our original house. Even though I wasn't obligated to, I gave her a check for $40,000, just under half of our combined savings. You might wonder why I did that when, under the prenup, I only needed to give her about half that amount. There were two reasons. First, Louise had destroyed any possibility of a relationship between us through her actions. I wanted to give her enough money so she could leave her parents' house and start fresh somewhere else. I had heard she was offered a job in Wollongong, which would mean we wouldn't have to see her again. By giving her the money, I hoped to encourage that move. Besides, the settlement I received from her previous employer to keep the affair between her and Roger quiet added an extra zero to what I gave her, so I wasn't short on cash. As for Roger, it seems he got into some trouble. After struggling to find a job, he ended up selling prohibited substances for a dealer, and in his first week, sold to an undercover cop. Now, he's serving 2 years for trafficking. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, if you ask me. 6 months after that, Rose and I got married. She looked stunning in her wedding dress, holding a bouquet over her stump. Although she struggled with self-consciousness and experienced bouts of depression, they never lasted long with the kids and me always by her side. Rose eventually changed jobs, using her psychology degree to counsel others who, like her, had lost limbs. 2 years into our marriage, she was honored by the government in the Australia Day Awards for her work helping people with disabilities. During her acceptance speech, she thanked her family and friends, and then she called me up on stage, saying I was the key to her success because I stood by her as she rebuilt her life after the accident. That period was quite busy. Rose and I participated in several media interviews and even appeared on a few morning shows where we discussed the physical and emotional challenges faced by those with disabilities. Despite everything, my wife was always beautiful and never let anyone see her cry or feel worried. But when she did have her low moments, she knew I was there to help her rise again. Our love for each other grew stronger every day. Though we had our disagreements, we always forgave each other and never went to bed angry. We hadn't seen Louise for about 3 years after the award ceremony. It was Carrie and Robbie's wedding. They had recently graduated from university with honors, had good jobs, and were eager to start a family while they were still young. Carrie didn't want to invite her mother, as they had only spoken twice in 3 years, and both conversations had been short and unfriendly. However, I persuaded her to extend an invitation to Louise, reasoning that since Louise had given birth to Carrie, she deserved to be part of the celebration. Eventually, Carrie agreed, but requested that Louise be seated with the regular guests, rather than with the family. I didn't really mind where my ex-wife sat, as long as it wasn't close to Rose and me. My main concern was ensuring that Carrie wouldn't look back later and regret that her mother wasn't present at her wedding. In the end, a compromise was reached. Louise was seated with her elderly parents, who were content to be a couple of tables back to maintain harmony with their granddaughter and her new husband. As is often the case with ex-wives at weddings, I was at the bar, getting myself a Kraken and Coke. It wasn't on the tab, but since I was paying, I could get what I wanted. Louise approached and leaned on the bar next to me. She ordered a glass of white wine and then turned to me. "I never said I was sorry, did I?" she asked bluntly, more as a statement than a question. "Nope," I replied, turning to look at the crowd. Rose, Sarah, and Carrie were on the other side of the room laughing about something. I smiled. "But then again, I never thought you would," I added, completing the thought. Louise sighed. "You're right. I was a total mess back then, a complete disaster of my own making," she said. "Yep," I replied, stretching out the last syllable before taking a sip of my drink. Rose glanced over at me, smiled, and then her expression changed when she saw Louise beside me. I gave a small shake of my head, and she nodded in understanding, aware that there was no problem. I saw both of you at the Australia Day Awards and have been following your achievements since then, Louise said with a hint of sadness. She watched my wife, her former friend, laughing with our daughters, knowing she would never experience a relationship like that with her own girls again. She hates me. They all do, don't they? Louise said, looking at them, then at me, and finally down into her wine glass. Hate is a strong word, Louise, I said, pausing for a moment before chuckling. Actually, it's pretty accurate for how they feel about you. But as time passes, the intensity of those feelings will fade. Who knows? In another decade, the girls might even take a call from you. I sensed, rather than saw, Louise's shoulders slump. Then she turned to me. What about you, Cameron? Do you hate me? My ex-wife asked. I shrugged. Hate, loathe, despise, take your pick. I heard the band tuning up in the background and smiled to myself, looking forward to dancing with my daughter. But you persuaded Carrie to invite me tonight. If you hate me that much, why? She lamented. I turned to look at Louise for the first time that night. She was a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her cheeks were sunken, suggesting poor eating habits, while her figure had grown larger. Her eyes held a haunted look, and it seemed her hair was not only graying but thinning out. Overall, the woman I had once loved was clearly broken. I studied her for a moment longer before responding. Louise, no mother should miss her daughter's wedding, even if she was a notorious girl of easy virtue. But I didn't invite you here to make you feel better. I invited you to ensure that our daughter could enter her own marriage with a clear conscience. I paused and raised my glass to a passing couple. That's all, and if I never have to see you again, I'll consider myself fortunate. With that, I walked away to join my family for the wedding dances. I heard a sobbing apology. I'm sorry. Unfortunately for her, her behavior had earned her no sympathy. The rest of the night was spent dancing, eating, joking, and laughing, and I didn't see Louise again. We later learned from her parents that Louise died a few years later, just after Sarah got engaged to a doctor. Yes, surprising as it was, at Sarah's engagement party, we found out that Louise had developed an infected ovarian CESD and passed away in the hospital with only her parents by her side. She hadn't wanted anyone to tell us, which was quite sad. As for Rose and me, we kept each other grounded. When our grandchildren arrived, we cherished them together. We traveled the world, experiencing new sights and wonders. We made love in countries around the globe, spoiled our grandkids, and even eventually, great-grandkids. Though age slowed us down, there were still moments when we got caught being mischievous by family members. No one really complained, knowing that Rose and I were deeply in love, and that love had only grown stronger over the years. Seeing Rose Petal, the girl I loved at 18, the woman I married in my 40s, and the playful grandma nearing 82, made me feel lucky. I knew in my heart that I would be loved until the day I die.